Welcome to the Tazara News Network, an African news network by Africans. The southern African country of Zambia is one of the poorest countries in the world. Yet with a few adjustments, the people of Zambia could easily enjoy an American middle-class living standard, and this can be done within 10 years. In this episode, we will talk about what economic transformations have to occur in order for the people of Zambia, or any other African country for that matter, to enjoy first world living standards using the resources of Africa without looking to the Western world or anywhere else for their living standards. In the United States, the average individual income is calculated at $30,000 a year by the US government. In Zambia, according to the World Bank and the United Nations, the average individual income is $1,552 a year. I know that this does not apply to all the indigenous Zambians. Some indigenous Zambians have successful careers and have family money. But the truth is, for most indigenous Zambians, life in Zambia is a nightmare. Most Zambians are extremely poor and have some of the lowest living standards in the world. Zambia has been independent from Britain for 55 years now. Within that 55-year period, Zambia could easily have attained the same living standards that the American people have, based on our resources and the size of our population. It is time to fulfill the promise of Zambia and provide a decent living standard for our people. The question is, why is a resource-rich African country like Zambia poor? Zambia is blessed with some of the most abundant natural resources in the world. Zambia is famous for making foreigners rich. There's a saying they say about Zambia. Zambia is a country that makes everyone rich, everyone apart from its own people. So the question is, why is Zambia poor? And the main reason Zambia is poor is because at the time of independence, our political leaders did not understand the chief cornerstone that is needed for sustainable economic development. That is the main reason that Zambia is poor. That is the main reason why the Zambian economy is weak, and that is the main reason that the Zambian people are suffering. And to understand this problem, to understand what happened to the Zambian people, we need to go back to the time of independence. We need to look at our political systems and the first president that Zambia had, our government, and from there we can understand why the people of Zambia and why the governments of Zambia have failed to provide decent living standard for the people of Zambia in 55 years of independence. Zambia, like most African countries, got its independence from the colonizers in the 1960s. Zambia got its independence in 1964, and our first president was named Kenneth Kaunda. He ruled for 27 years. Kenneth Kaunda loved the Zambian people. He provided all kinds of social programs for the Zambian people, from education to food subsidies. And he was able to do this because of copper. Zambia is one of the largest copper suppliers in the world. And at the time, the government of Zambia owned the copper mines. They were state-owned. So using the revenue from the copper, the government was able to provide all these subsidies and create a middle class of indigenous Zambian people. I was able to grow up middle class in Zambia because members of my family worked for the government copper mining company, and I was able to grow up middle class in Zambia, middle class by any standard. But in the end, the policies of Kenneth Kaunda failed to provide lasting prosperity for the people of Zambia. The reason this failed is because at some point the price of copper on the world market collapsed, and without the revenue from the copper, the Zambian government was unable to maintain social programs and rapid economic development. This led to the utter destitution of the Zambian people. The sale of copper, the sale of natural resources is not the chief cornerstone that is needed in the economic development of any country. Natural resources like copper, silver, or gold will never provide lasting economic development for any country. The chief cornerstone that is needed for sustainable economic development is not copper, it is not gold, it is not silver, it is not any mineral out there. And so, what is the cornerstone of long-term sustainable economic development? It's definitely not copper, gold, or any other natural resources that a country has. Having abundant natural resources does not mean that a country will have long-term economic growth, or whether its people are going to be wealthy for the long term. There is a reason that Zambia is poor and that the United States is rich, and that reason is because the people who built the United States understood the cornerstone of long-term economic development. The governments that built Zambia did not understand that, and that's why Zambia is poor. And Zambia is not the only country that has suffered economic collapse because of not understanding the chief cornerstone of long-term sustainable development. The Soviet Union was once a great empire, a rival to the United States. At one time, there were only two world powers, the Soviet Union and the United States. And the Soviet Union was every bit as powerful as the United States. But the Soviet Union collapsed, and the United States is still going strong. There is a reason for this. The people who built the Soviet Union did not understand the chief cornerstone of long-term sustainable economic development. The Soviet Union used oil. They sold a lot of oil to Europe and to the rest of the world to fund all their social programs. When the price of oil on the world market collapsed, the Soviet Union was not able to maintain its social programs. It wasn't able to pay for food. It wasn't able to pay its military. It wasn't able to pay its civil servants, and the Soviet Union collapsed. The United States spends more money on its military than any other country has ever done, and yet the United States is still going strong. The reason the United States is still able to be a superpower today is because the people who built the United States understood the cornerstone of long-term economic development. Like Zambia, the economy of the United States of America should have collapsed a long time ago. The United States economy has received massive hits over the years. Massive hits that should have completely obliterated the United States. One of the biggest hits that the United States economy took was the collapse of their banking system. The United States banking system has collapsed several times over the years, and this was a total collapse of their economy. That should have wiped out the United States economy, and yet they're still going strong. Another reason why the United States should no longer be around as an economic power is because of the death of their industries. The United States used to produce everything that the world needed. But in the 1980s, the Japanese came along and they started producing cars, they started producing all these things. These things almost completely wiped out American manufacturing, and America lost thousands and thousands of jobs. And then the Chinese came along. If you live in America today, you know that everything in America today is made in China. Virtually everything. There are very few things that you can find in the United States today that are actually made in the United States. Everything is imported from China. The United States has lost so many industries, has lost so many jobs. It's amazing that the United States economy is still afloat. Then the other reason why the United States should not exist as an economic power is because of droughts. I live in the driest parts of the United States, and the United States has been hit by serious droughts. Some of them lasted over 10 years, the kind of droughts that would have killed millions of people in Africa. And yet the United States is still going strong. And this is because of one reason, and one reason only. The people who built the United States of America understood the chief cornerstone of long-term sustainable economic development, and that is why the United States is still going strong. Despite all the disasters that have befallen, the United States of America is still one of the richest countries in the world, is still one of the most powerful countries in the world, and people are still dying every day trying to get into the United States of America. And that is for one reason and one reason only. The answer is a green revolution. A green revolution is the reason why the United States is rich and why Zambia is poor. A green revolution is the true cornerstone of any long-term sustainable economic development. Without a green revolution, any country is bound to fail. African countries have failed since the 1960s when African countries got independence, because African countries did not initiate a green revolution. They depended on oil and gold and copper, and those things are not sustainable. Minerals do not provide the jobs that are needed for mass employment, and with the price fluctuations, at some point your economy is bound to collapse. A green revolution is what is needed. The smallholder farmers have to be taken care of, and to do this you need mass irrigation projects across the whole country. That is how the United States became what it is today. On June 17, 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt of the United States signed an act called the Reclamation Act. This Reclamation Act forced the United States government to build massive reservoirs, dams, and irrigation systems across the United States. That is why the United States that's why the United States is the way it is today, because of that one single act. That one single act lifted the smallholder farmers out of poverty using irrigation, and with that those smallholder farmers were able to build the businesses slowly but surely into the business empires that we know today. Companies like Microsoft and Hewlett-Packard and Nestle and all these companies are based on one simple fact: a green revolution. Without a green revolution, the smallholder farmers will remain poor, and without the smallholder farmers, no country can sustain long-term economic development. This is the reason why the United States is rich, and this is the reason why the United States has been able to sustain itself throughout so many disasters. A green revolution is the cornerstone of any long-term sustainable development. The same thing happened to the Asian tigers, the Koreans, the Japanese, the Chinese, long before they built their famous companies like Toshiba and Huawei and Toyota and all these companies that people admire. The first thing they did was have a green revolution. They took care of their smallholder farmers by providing them with loans, by providing them with irrigation facilities, by providing them with and all the things that they needed to drag themselves out of poverty. Once this happened, then they were able to move on to the next stage. It's been proven time and time again. Taking care of the smallholder farmers is the first true step in long-term sustainable development. Without it, no country's economy can last for long. And that is why African countries keep collapsing, because we did not have a green revolution. As you well know, Zambian farmers depend on the rain to irrigate their crops, and that is why Zambia is poor. American farmers have irrigation, and that is why America is rich. I live in the driest part of the United States, in the desert. And I've spoken to many people here, and they have all told me the same thing. This used to be the the poorest part of the United States. The people who live here were as poor as the people are in Africa today. But it was a green revolution that turned this place around. It was the massive irrigation, the massive reservoirs that turned Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and all these other places that we talk about today into an economic powerhouse. In the 1940s, when the United States was fighting World War II, the United States was still importing half of its grain, half of its wheat. By the 1950s, the United States had become self-sufficient in wheat production. By the 1960s, when the African countries were gaining independence, the United States was exporting wheat to the rest of the world. It took some time, and it was a very difficult process, but they did it. And the United States is still wealthy and powerful today because of that green revolution. And until our political leaders understand the importance of a green revolution, Africa will remain poor. Everyone seems to know this, apart from us, the African people. Once we lift the Zambian smallholder farmer out of poverty, once we provide the Zambian smallholder farmer with irrigation, seeds, a market, and all the other things that are needed for a green revolution, but especially irrigation. Irrigation is the key. Once we provide that to the Zambian farmer, to the African farmer, Africa will develop much faster than we can possibly imagine. That's what happened in the United States, that's what happened in Asia, that's what happened in Europe before any of these other people had their green revolutions. And once that happened, industrialization took off.